Welcome back to Star Wars Minute. It's the daily podcast where we analyze, scrutinize, and Finn gets recognized. The Star Wars movies, 1 minute at a time. I'm Pete the Retailer from PeteTheRetailer.com.
I'm Alex Robinson from AlexRobinson.fun.
I'm
Everybody all at once.
He's
In harmony.
Griffin Newman from Blank Check and Talking TCGS and Search Party. And you can find him at Griff Lightning on Twitter.
He's Patrick Cotnoir from the George Lucas talk show and CISO and the Chris Gethard show and the Booker of Monologists at AskCat weekly
and
at the New
Patrick,
York UCB theaters that have gone out of business.
And Patrick is also the subject of the podcast Elysium Watch, which you can find. It's based on an ongoing campaign he did when he discovered that there was a poster for the Matt Damon movie Elysium that was still up many years later in his subway station. And every day he'd take a picture with it until they took it down.
Yep.
I'm realizing
got on the news. I was on NY1.
Nice. I'm realizing that I messed this up because I should have done Connor's introduction so he could do Patrick, and unfortunately now I've created a void.
Or
Connor
a spotlight, a focus.
No, because I did a little for Patrick as well, so now Patrick has to do a little for me.
And I'll do a little for Connor as well.
Okay, you might know Connor from the Netflix film Coin Heist. You might know him from, what was that other movie? The Robert Redford movie, Connor.
The Discovery?
The Discovery, or you might know him as George Lucas on the George Lucas talk show.
Yeah, I mean, you also might know him from his stellar appearance on the Lexus L Studios original web series Cop Show.
That's right. I had a brief appearance on that, and you
might.
were in that as well, Griffin.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
And I was the production coordinator on that.
Yeah,
Oh,
that was
there
the
you go.
unifying. That's our Phantom Menace. That's the origin story. Yeah. Yeah, when all the pieces were set in place. But the George Lucas talk show, we all do the George Lucas talk show together.
Exactly, and that's why you're here.
Yeah.
You're here with us today to talk about minute 40 of Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. 40 starts with Finn telling Rose. Nope, I had it right the first time. It starts with Rose recognizing Finn, and it ends with Finn telling Rose that's disgraceful.
This is 40.
It is. Congratulations, we made it.
This is...
And then we're going to get those over-the-hill mugs and stuff like that.
I think John Boyega does a nice job of, I give him a lot of grief, but I think he does a nice job of playing, I don't know, would you say cocky Finn? Like, kind of like, oh, well, I'm just, he's dealing with his fame now. So I think he does a good job of selling.
This is a pretty skillful scene of comedic acting because he has to, within just a minute, the shifts he makes are pretty agile in terms of, like, he's on the run. He feels that he's getting caught. Then she recognizes him. She's impressed. He goes to being cocky. And then he gets uncomfortable with how much she idolizes him. And then he has to sort of downplay it. I mean, that's 3 big shifts within a minute.
And then the beginning of the next shift, which is realizing that she's been, like, tasing deserters.
Right.
So he has to go immediately back to, oh, no.
More fear of her, yes.
My first 4 notes for this minute are, number 1, the Finn is funny. I said that's a funny line. I like the reading of it. Note number 2, doing talking is also funny, lowercase. Number 3, may the force be with you is also funny, uppercase also. And then number 4, wow, you two is also funny, both uppercase. I was just like, oh, it's a funny line. That's a funny line. That's a funny line too. They keep them coming really fast.
You laughed for a minute straight.
I did.
Yeah, it's worth noting that the production company for the George Lucas talk show is called That Was Just So Funny Productions, and it's based on a clip of, how old were you in that clip, Patrick?
It was probably like 4 or 5, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, laughing at something and saying, that was just so funny. And all of your notes are, that was just so funny.
Basically, yeah.
So you're consistent. That's good.
I'm nothing but consistent.
Well, yeah, it is a good, we were talking earlier, there's some points where people think the comedy doesn't work as well in this movie, but this is, I think, clearly this is a good just kind of like back and forth dialogue scene where the comedy is working. And it's also kind of, pushing, it's also, character development. We're digging into, Finn's character. We're meeting a new character in Rose, and we're digging into Finn's character and him, kind of going back to that. Okay, I'm not really yet in it for the revolution yet. I'm I want to find my friend, and he's, we know that he's still not, even though he was kind of with the team last movie, he's still not like all about the I keep wanting to say the rebellion, but the resistance, and it's
completely different thing.
Yeah, totally.
No, it's so different. But that's, I mean, an interesting thing that sort of reveals itself in this scene is the way that Rose talks about her sister, who just died this heroic death. The way she talks about the way her and her sister used to view the resistance, growing up, and the sort of morals behind it. We're not used to seeing major dialogue scenes with rebels or resistance members who are not, quote unquote, the heroes of the story, Like, here's someone who is not, did not enroll, did not enlist, did not sign up in order to be the main character. She's not someone who seems unhappy about the fact that she is just part of the larger movement, although she clearly has the dreams of getting more involved. That she's someone who is so ideologically committed to the cause and just sort of like, I want to do whatever I can to help.
Yeah.
It's also interesting within within the span of several minutes ago. I'll once again bring up the way that The Last Jedi is the Wire of Star Wars. Because a few minutes earlier, you had the moment where Poe is trying to sort of insert himself into the back into this sort of the authority level, and Holdo saying to him, "You're the guy who got our entire bombing fleet killed." And one of the characteristics throughout The Wire is we're constantly seeing people whose lives are completely affected by characters who are in separate plot strands from them. So someone will make a choice in one part of an episode or a season of The Wire, and then we'll see someone else whose life is absolutely devastated, and they don't know that it's the result of another character that we, the audience, know. Like a cop did something, or a drug dealer did something. Somebody did something, and the results of that were devastating to an unconnected character. And in this moment, when we've seen Rose weeping over the loss of her sister, right after a scene where we've witnessed the person who was partly responsible for that death happening. You know what I mean? That he's connected to this moment that could be, and the reason for Holdo's anger is tied to the reason for Rose's sorrow. And
right, like everyone who died because of your poor strategy was an actual person who has family members who are now grieving them. They're not just deep-cut action figures,
Yeah. And that's not something we've necessarily seen before. Whereas the comedy in this sequence, I feel like is very much, back to episode 4. There's very much. I think sometimes people, because we're so used to all of the imagery of episode 4, it sometimes surprises me when I think of how sort of goofball Marx Brothers it is that they end up on the Death Star, and then they conk out a couple of stormtroopers and put on their costumes and sneak around dressed up like them. That's a very screwball comedy sort of thing. And then the moments where like Han is pretending to be like the guy who knows what to say over the intercom, and he's like, "Oh, how are you?" Where it's that same sort of like bluffing your way through a situation is very reminds me of the way that Finn is trying to be. The same way Finn was in Force Awakens, where he keeps trying to sort of bluff at Han Solo, and Han Solo can see right through him because he's been bluffing that way his whole life. But Finn is sort of in that position of being he's still very green at trying to do that kind of like, I'm a hero, I'm this. It's very much like this.
Finn's also like a child soldier, right? He's been robbed of his own like identity and his individuality for so much of his life, and then his awakening is meeting Poe and Han Solo, right? And Rey in between. Like, Rey's the first person I think he really relates to as an equal, you know? And I certainly think he has a big crush on her. But in between that, it's like he meets two awesome sort of scoundrel heroes. And so he's very much a dude who in the last week has met the two coolest dudes he's ever known and is still struggling to do an okay impression of them.
Two of the coolest dudes any of us have ever known.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah,
very true.
Like, galaxy-wide, it's hard to imagine if you were to just line up all the cool dudes. Yeah. It's hard to imagine that Poe and Han wouldn't be part of the lineup, you know?
In a way, I mean, incredible luck on his part to get to meet two dudes that cool in 1 week. Most people in this universe never get to meet either of those dudes.
Mm-hmm.
True.
Yeah.
So, and as you say, well, one thing I like is that now we see Finn being treated with the same awe and reverence. Like, oh my gosh, you're the Finn and stuff that Finn was treating Han Solo and that whole story with in the other one. It does seem a little odd that it's only been like 4 days or something since Finn joined, but, you know, we'll let it slide.
News travels fast in this universe.
Yeah.
They're all checking their phones. Who's this Finn guy that's trending?
So we can't get
So what is he?
But that would be something where, like, if you guys heard, like, I can't even think of who's someone in the news in like the last few days where they became like a big name. And then all of a sudden you're in front of them. You're like, oh my gosh, yeah, I know you. You're that guy.
You're trending.
Yeah,
Even to that point, Patrick, like, I feel like we're New York UCB theater guys, R.I.P. And when Kelly Marie Tran got cast as Rose, it was that same thing of just like, Jesus, someone from UCB in LA got like cast in a Star Wars movie. She's one of the lead characters.
Yeah.
Like, if you're working lower level grunt jobs in the Resistance, and some guy actually got himself on the front line and was like lightsaber fighting Kylo Ren, you'd be like, holy crap.
Yeah.
Well, also just the idea of a stormtrooper turned rebel.
Yeah.
That's big news.
Huge.
Yeah, in improv theater comedy terms, that's straight to the weekend. You know what I mean?
Losing all the listeners.
They just went straight.
But he was with a huge improv.
But even more than that, it would be like he was a stand-up, and then suddenly he was on a weekend improv. He was like, it's a completely different discipline.
Right. Never the two shall meet.
Yeah, a stormtrooper who's turned rebel. I mean, we've heard of people conking out a couple stormtroopers and putting on their costume, but this is a whole other thing.
I mean, you know, I know you guys mentioned that your listeners tend to tense up when toy talk enters the fray.
Not tense up.
Lose their minds, let's say. Taz out when you talk about toys on this show. But I'll tell you, comedians getting into deep lore of comedy communities and the jargon with which they talk about other careers that they envy, it tends to go over great on podcasts. I feel like unilaterally people love it when people get into like who was on what team at what time. When did they get Montreal? I just think this is going to be a huge boon for your listeners to pull them back in after the toy talk.
We're trying to balance it.
Good.
This is tangentially related to what you guys were just talking about, but not really. I think this scene, in the best way possible, feels like a very much an audition scene. Like, this feels like the scene that she could have auditioned with because it gives her a lot to do. She's funny, she's crying, she's serious, she tases. You know what I mean? Like, it gives her a lot of things in very short succession, and it feels like something that if you're wanting to see what an actor or an actress can do, this feels like that scene.
Fun fact, though. Fun fact. It was not the audition scene.
Yeah. I mean,
you know what the audition? You know what the audition scene was?
When they read the Thenthiers.
It was talking about the people. It was at the Canto Bite, the speech about like looking down at the rich people in the universe who had it was the class warfare. That was the audition scene.
Yeah,
I could see that.
So you're dead wrong, Patrick. You're dead wrong.
But I'm just saying
this would have been a better one.
This would have been a better one.
For whatever it's worth, I had the exact same note. It does feel like, as a marginal actor myself, when you get an audition scene like this, you're like, oh, thank God, I actually can like show something here. Hopefully, like there's something to work on. You know, there's like 5 shifts in the course of 5 pages or less. Yeah.
Well, here's something else here's another skill that maybe she exhibited during the scene, which is looping, or ADR rather, because there's a if you look,
dumping alert.
What? When she
That's a dumping alert.
Yeah, when she says like, I'm not used to talking to resistance
doing
talking with the resistance heroes is not my forte. The word forte seems like it was something else. We watch her mouth; it seems like she's not saying forte. And I was trying desperately to figure out. I don't know. It something with a little bit of a harder kind of teeth movement to it.
Huh.
I played it back a couple of times.
Fathier?
It's not my fathier. But that's going to bug me every time I watch this movie now, because I hate it when I find little things like that. And I'm like,
I am your fathier.
Yeah, he is.
You need to hire a lip reader.
He takes off his mask and it's a horse under there.
That's right. It did not test well. That move, it took people right out of it.
Yeah.
I'm curious because as someone who is prone to mumbling and has had to do too much ADR in my limited acting career, I wonder if she just pronounced it wrong. Like a lot of times they make you redo things in ADR for clarity. You come back 10 months later, right? And there's just a piece of paper, and they just go like, no one can understand what you're saying here. And her mouth movement is different, but it's not recognizable as any other specific word. That maybe she just said it strangely.
Maybe she kind of swallowed it. She's like, no, my forte.
Yeah.
They're like, wait, that's a punchline. We need to really hit that a little bit.
She did a giant gulp in the middle. Not my forte.
We start to catch on that she is starting to catch on that he might be trying to escape. She's like, oh yeah, I can't believe how many people I tried to stun, and I thought it would have been funny if during their whole scene, like, people kept walking in, like, carrying luggage, like they were like, oh, and they like immediately back out when they see someone standing by the escape pods, or there'd be like 4 guys who'd been tased already laying there that she'd already been.
That's another thing I like about Rose, but that I imagine is an immediate turnoff for some people, is that she's like a dork, is that she's like a teacher's pet, that she's like absolutely wants to do things by the book. Which most of
That's
our
probably why it bothers people so much.
Right, most of our
think
classics
of themselves as being Han Solo, but they know they're really Rose Tico.
Exactly, and even like
really
Leia is all about like pushing back on whenever anyone tells her what to do. Luke, despite the fact that he studies under these Jedi Masters, his whole arc is based on like, I don't want to be here on this farm. And Rose is like, no, I'm pretty good at my job. I listen to my bosses. I follow the rules.
Yeah.
Well, I also want to back that up for exactly. We talked about kind of Finn being a child soldier, but like there's a weird moral issue here with like there are people in the Resistance who don't want to be part of this anymore and are trying to leave, and she's forcibly detaining them. She's tasing them and keeping them here. And I'm like, well, that doesn't seem like something the good guys should be doing.
Did she say that someone told her to do this?
Or she's just like, I took it upon myself. I'm like a militia.
Yeah, because I don't specifically remember her being like, they sent me down here to make sure no one left. I don't remember that.
Right, she might just be Tase crazy.
Right.
Tase crazy.
I think it's more.
I understand if it's a matter of resources for they don't want to lose the escape pods. But still, it seems like
it's that one.
I don't play video games generally, but I would buy a video game if it was Rose Tico Tase crazy, and it was purely limited to this one sequence where it's people trying to escape the Resistance, and you have to tase them before they get into an escape pod.
Oh,
that feels like a prequel era video game that would have come out, where they're just like, the computer game.
I think I like a nice simple game where you got a basic task and you got to keep employing it with a little bit of because I think that's a great place to insert all of those jokes that you want.
Right.
I think if they had, part of me imagines the days they would have wasted shooting all those gags, only to realize like this is pretty crazy. It adds about 5 to 10 minutes to the scene. But in the game, I'd love to see people with resistance luggage coming in and either making it or not.
Yeah.
I imagine it like a Tapper style arcade game where you're just like going up and down, left and right across the different escape pods, trying to tase them, make sure you catch them before they get in.
Yeah, and the way you build up your energy at various points, you have to go over and sit down and have a cry. So it's one of those things where it's like if you're getting
refresh time.
Yes,
that's you need to also be able to like refresh your emotional state.
Yes.
And at certain points, heroic legendary characters will enter, and you'll be so overwhelmed by them that you don't know whether they're escaping or not. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like you could have characters come down that you're sure are, it's Admiral Holdo's here, but it turns out to be some cowardly droid or something that's dressed up as Holdo.
And you lose points if you tase them if they are.
Yeah, if you really tase Holdo and she just came down to say, good job with all the tasing. But don't go tase crazy.
I'm picturing this for the Wii, so you can actually do the movements with the thing.
Oh, that would be so good.
Mm-hmm.
What a workout.
Now, yesterday we did tease something, and I feel like people are waiting for us to.
Oh, tease.
Yesterday. Oh, let me try that again. Hang on one sec. And okay.
Period of Civil War.
Yesterday we did tease something, and I feel like people will be upset if we don't bring it back up today. Is that okay?
Patrick, I'm just so sorry. I just want to jump in here. You did something very embarrassing. You meant to say tease, and you accidentally said tase because we were just talking about Rose Tico tase crazy.
Okay, let me try that again.
Yeah, I'm just worried people are going to tease out.
I just don't want to have to ADR it later. Hang on.
Right.
Now, yesterday we did. Let me take it one more time. Okay, now yesterday we did tease something, and I feel like we should probably bring it back up because I know a lot of people are probably waiting on it. Is that okay with you guys?
Yeah, I don't remember what it was, but
we were talking about the set.
Oh, right.
And Griffin and I both had notes, but I felt like we should save it for this one.
Well, I got my note out of the way. All I wanted to say was I thought the set looked good, and then you jumped down my throat and said save it for next minute. I got my note out of the way. I think it's a good-looking set.
I think when I was watching it,
a lot of build up for that.
Yeah. Well, here's my note, and maybe it'll be worth the build-up. I don't know. I think it looks, again, in the best way possible, like a Disney World waiting area for a Star Wars ride. Like it looks like a Star Tours or the Rise of the Resistance waiting area.
Right.
It just looks like something that you can picture yourself being in, about to go on a ride.
Which is fitting because you're supposed to be in the area that's sort of like, because those areas are designed to look like this isn't the main area, this is just the waiting area.
Yeah.
Right.
I also think it's a good call because it's like all this sort of identical, multiple entrances to different escape pods. With a ride design like that, you need to make sure that one line doesn't look more exciting to be on than the others.
Yeah.
That it's like any one of these is going to give you an equal chance at adventure.
Yeah. Well, that would be a cool ride if you just, you don't know where you're going to, almost like Star Tours where, you get on it and you're going to two different places. You don't know what they're going to be. Have a kind of thing where you're waiting, you go in and you're in an escape pod and you don't know where in Star Wars it's going to end up. Then you get to have a little adventure.
And you don't know if you're going to get tased while you're waiting in line.
That's right.
I was going to pitch it, Rose Tico's Tase coaster.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Well, that's great.
They put little shocks in the seats, so sometimes accidentally you get tased. They're in a loop.
It's like being the spy. It's like, who gets tased this time? Oh, it's the little girl.
Yeah.
I know Patrick's going to jump down my throat for this, but I'd like to take a page from Griffin's book and say that I think the set in the next scene is great.
I think that's great. I'm very happy you said it.
Yeah.
The next scene being something we're not going to talk about? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but Griffin already set the precedent that we can go ahead and talk about how much we like the set, and you already set the precedent that nothing drives you crazier than when people talk about the set from the next minute.
That's a great
point. Makes you taste crazy, but I also think you have to let Connor throw out his thoughts that the next set is good because he's not going to be here to say it in a minute.
Go for it.
It's his last chance to let people know what he thinks of the next set.
Ooh. There's also something about having a set having a scene that takes place with escape pods. It's not something that happens frequently, but it's one of the first things that happens in the first part of the first Star Wars movie that came out, which is like getting into escape. That's back to where it all started. So like while Finn is trying to get away from a Star Wars adventure, the very first Star Wars adventure that anybody ever saw began because two droids got into an escape pod and shot down onto a desert planet. So there's a nice little mirroring to the fact that he's trying to get out of Star Wars using the very kind of escape hatch vehicle that our original heroes first started all this in.
Although
now I know we're not in light speed now, but can you use an escape pod during when you're in hyperspace?
You're asking if a ship is in lightspeed mode, could an escape pod safely eject off of it? That's your question?
Yeah, well, because Rose mentions that, can you believe it? People have been trying to come down here and escape.
Yeah.
And they only just dropped out of hyperspace, so have people been trying to get into it during hyperspace? Maybe that's why she's tasing people, because it's not safe.
I don't remember if there's any time that happens.
It feels very risky to me. Like, it feels like one of those things just in terms of the escape pod is not going to be able to operate at hyperspeed. So the shift in speeds would probably, like, I just feel like people, they'd mess up their necks and stuff, you know?
It'd be like jumping out of a moving car.
Right. Okay. It's just like horrible whiplash. Even if the pod itself could withstand it, I think the human body couldn't. What did you find, Patrick?
Now I'm on the escape pod page on Wikipedia, but it's legends, so this doesn't really count. It does say it counts in your mind. Yeah, sure. Some escape pods were equipped with hyperspace capabilities. That's what the page says. Wow. Now let me look in canon. Here we go. Hyper anything? I don't think. Some were fitted with hyperdrives. That is in canon.
Well,
so
I like thinking that some of the most messed up looking aliens that we've ever seen in Star Wars, like Hammerhead, that's not the way he's supposed to look, but he ejected from an escape pod while the ship was traveling in high. Some of the people that you look at and think, oh, that guy looks kind of weird, but I guess that's how his species looks.
Poof.
Yeah, it's like, nope, that's not how he looks. That guy got messed up pretty bad by jumping ship.
He ejected him during hyperspace, man. Stretched him out like taffy.
Yeah. Uriel
Stuck his head out the window.
He's a cautionary tale. He used to have the world's shortest neck and the world's longest mane of hair.
Aporansis.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
They're the same species.
His head was in one place, and then the pod started to go into hyperspace, and his body just went farther away.
And then it was like a tether.
That's my tether.
The only creature to be in two systems at the same time.
Hey, now.
His head was in one system, and his body was in another system.
Well, speaking of that, what's besides just flat out escaping?
What's the deal?
What's Finn's plan here? If he's going to eject, is he going to go back to Car?
Find Rey. That's all he cares about.
But how?
Yeah.
Like, how is he going to go in this escape pod?
He's got the tracking device.
Finn's
got the tracking device.
He's got the tracking device, but Finn's also not much of a plan guy. We have to remember. I mean, the only reason his escape in Force Awakens was not disastrous is because he happened to have access to Poe, right?
Because he met one of the coolest guys in the galaxy.
Right, and even so, it was dicey, right? It was dicey. He thought the Poe was dead, and then he only really things turned out okay because he ran into Rey, and Rey had the kind of go ahead and forethought. I don't think Finn's a big planner.
Here's the thing, Griffin. I'm gonna go into just a devil's advocate mode for about 60 seconds. Stop. I don't mean any of what I'm about to say, but I'm gonna go into this mood. I'm gonna push back hard. Okay.
Just for a Star Wars minute.
Yeah. I'm not buying it, Griffin. There's a lot of coincidences going on. Like, how's he just happened to run into Poe, okay? Like, out of all the people in the galaxy, like when he tries to make his escape, he just happens to run into one of the coolest dudes in the galaxy. And then a little bit later, he runs into yet another one of the coolest dudes in the galaxy. Something doesn't pass the smell test, Griffin. When I was growing up, I watched Star Wars movies that made 100% sense. Everything that happened makes sense. You watch a thing happen, it makes sense. Now they're making movies where it's like, it's all made up. The movies we grew up with were true, and they passed the smell test, Griffin. Something stinks. I'm not buying it. Are we doing my 60 seconds yet?
And time.
Great.
It is my favorite running bit that Connor does in character as George Lucas, going back for years of us doing it on stage to us doing the weekly show now, is when people ask what he thinks of the Disney movies, he usually says, they're good, it's just that's not what happened. That in George Lucas's opinion, it's like, that's good for fan fiction, but that's not what really happened. I know what really happened, and those movies are just making it up.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is a bit that I borrowed from the real George Lucas, basically, because he sort of was like, well, you're making these movies, but like, I want to tell you about these microscopic wills that were actually controlling everything. I wanted to tell you about these microbiological creatures that were controlling everything, that the kind of stuff that you know, yeah, they were journaling. Yeah, they were bullet journaling. There was going to be a lot of journaling. The
wills was a scrapbook of the wills.
Yeah. So I would always Lucas, his reaction to these movies was like, well, yeah, but I know what really happened, and which is, you know,
I hope he wrote it down somewhere.
Yeah, that's always the most fascinating thing, is when people decide which ones, and it's great. You have the freedom to decide which parts of Star Wars are real and which ones aren't. But just know that it's just a fun thing. You know, like, you could decide that Empire is where it ends if you want. You could be like, I only like the first two that came out, and everything else is just a bunch of silly stories, you know?
Now you tell us.
Back it up even further. I would always say, like, I want to a little bit live in the universe where there was Star Wars, and then the holiday special came out and everybody's like, oh, let's not do that anymore, and just nothing else ever happened.
Yeah.
I only like the first 3 minutes of the original movie. The crawl ends, it starts to pan down, and then that's the end of my Star Wars. That's
I'll
all
say
I care about.
that's even too much for me. I think it really peaks at the crawl. Once we start seeing faces on screen, that's not my Star Wars. Star Wars for me is a series about text moving very slowly further and further away from the camera.
I remember when I saw episode 4 in the theater, and I thought, I am watching my new favorite book. And as I read it, I thought, wonderful, cinema and literature have finally merged. I'm watching a book on screen. No one has done this before. I'm settling in for 2 hours of reasonably paced reading in a font that is dynamic. And then George Lucas lost his nerve. You know? Because somebody told him that the first rule of cinema was show, don't tell. Well, he was showing us a great book. And then he completely sold out in minute 3 of Star Wars. And here come the pictures. Okay, like I'm a child. I can't read a book in a movie theater for 2 hours.
What is a spaceship doing interrupting my book?
Yeah.
Of course, now
Vroom,
the purists will tell you that the only true Star Wars is the part where it says Star Wars on the screen, and then once the crawl starts, then it's all that's all just add-on nonsense.
For me, Star Wars is about 2 words, not hundreds of words slowly crawling their way across the screen.
Yeah. The first thing I noticed is
you guys would go see in the theater. But
the first thing I noticed was a lot of these words are neither star nor wars, and I'm sorry, I'm not buying it.
Yeah. The period of Civil War. There's one. Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
1 out of 2 ain't bad.
Mm.
Well, I wanted to just real quick dig into the related. A way to relate to Finn, we talked about it kind of like where he's like, oh, may the force be with you. Like he's like struggling with what to say. And we're, you know, You guys have been on things. Alex and I are far from famous, but we've still encountered people who, want to talk to us and they're excited to meet us. And I always have a hard time kind of figuring out what to say to somebody, being like, oh, yeah, thanks, yes, like thumbs up. I feel like Alex is a little bit better at it than I am, but it's still an awkward thing. And do you have any awkward interactions that come to mind? I already mentioned talking to BB Newirth in a Star Trek shirt, but she wasn't there to see me.
There's one I always think of, which is one of the last, if not the last convention I did in the before times. There was a guy who came over to my table, and it's like there's like a banner or whatever, and they're like the photos on the table in front of me. So there are like a bunch of photos of me wearing the costume I wore on the Tick, and there's like signage that says like Griffin Newman parentheses the Tick, right? And this guy walks over and he like looks at me and he looks down at the table and his eyes widen and his like jaw drops and he goes, Are you really? And then he looks down again to read the name and goes, Griffin Newman? And I said, yeah. And he went, oh my God, I can't believe it's you. Man, this is so cool. And then he looked down at the table and then he looked back up at me and he went, Ant-Man, right? And I was like, were you just guessing? Were you just looking at a picture of a guy wearing a costume that kind of looks like an insect? You acted like you were blown away here.
I also like that this guy walked up to your table. Presumably, by the way you're telling the story, there was no one else in line. And
no,
he thought
of course not. Yes.
He thought that Ant-Man had no one waiting for him. I like that.
But not only that he was like, I can't believe it. Are you this person?
Yeah.
It says you are on this sign with a picture of your face on it.
Yeah.
Who I also don't know by name and I don't know what they've been in.
Yeah.
He's probably never met anyone who had their name on a banner before, so.
I know. I'll say that same convention.
That
same convention, there was a person in a really good Arthur costume who kept on walking around, and I was like, can't wait to meet this person. And then they got into Patrick Warburton's line and never came to my table. And I was just like, man, how badly did I drop the ball in their eyes that they love the Tick and they love Arthur and they just refuse to even meet the person who played Arthur next.
Maybe they were worried if you guys met and you shook hands, like that would like cancel out the universe.
Maybe. Look at
Arthurs in the same.
I want to make it clear. I love Patrick Warburton too. Like I would have gone to his table first, but I just was waiting for. At some point, they're probably going to want to come around, and even if they go like, "Look, I don't have a ton of money. I prioritize Warburton." I thought they at least want to give me a tip of the hat or something. My answer is I have no idea how to deal with people, Peter.
I mean, I think Connor and Griffin and I have all worked on shows in the past, or, projects in the past, where like a certain type of fan likes them, and you can always tell that person when you're seeing them, you're like, you're a Gethard Show fan, or like, oh, you're an improv nerd, or whatever. And I think you just, Connor, Griffin, feel free to speak up, but whenever I'm always surprised when someone would come up to me and be like, oh, I know you from a UCB thing or whatever. But if, they're obviously like, happy to see you. So as long as you're just very nice and gracious and like ask them questions, even if you can tell it's going to be a socially awkward interaction, I feel like that always negates it or helps to negate it a little bit.
Yeah, that's always my strategy. Asking them questions always feels like the best path. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good way of dealing with it, is to try and inquire, be curious about them, because it's a good sort of very sincere and genuine wall that you can put up, but it's also it's genuinely a more interesting interaction both for you, and it feels better for them too. That to take it, they already know who you are. I've had people, because there's a podcast I do with a friend of ours, JD Amato, called 12 Hour Day with JD and Connor. And every now and then, and every episode of this podcast is at least 12 hours long. We'll spend an entire day together. And there's a relatively small but devoted listening audience for this. And every now and then I'll run into someone who will identify as a 12 head, and they'll say like, hey, I'm a major 12 head. And what this means is they have listened to me and JD just casually hanging out in audio format for hundreds of hours. And that they know me. It's as if they have hung out with me that long.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a completely one-way thing. So I'm like, oh, you've been just in a room where it's not me in presentational mode. It's me just talking to JD. Half the time, once you've been on the air for 10 hours, you start to forget you're on a podcast. And it is like a real version of you, even if you have some defenses up. I will say I've been pretty lucky in the sense that I don't get recognized very often. It's usually pretty nice. And it'll be someone who's like, what do I know you from? And I'll list a couple of things or whatever. But I've had a couple of good experiences where I've been walking with friends in New York City and someone will be like a fan of me from like seeing improv shows at UCB, and they'll get very excited, and it'll be impressive to the friends that are visiting because they'll be like, oh my God, you got recognized on the street. But most of the time I had an interaction when I was going to Canada to do an improv show and do an improv workshop. And when I was going through customs, the customs guy was like, wait, are you an actor? And I was like, yeah. He's like, what have I seen you in? And I was like, I know this guy doesn't recognize me. I know who it is. I know who he thinks it is. And so I started going through, I'm like, have you seen Orange is the New Black? He's like, no. I started listing other things. And the things I was listing were getting increasingly obscure and increasingly less likely that this border agent had seen it. And so then I was like, listen, a lot of times people think that they mistake me for the actor David Costabile, who plays Gale on Breaking Bad, and he's on Billions. And they're like, that's it. I'm like, yeah. And he's like, hey, did you see El Camino? And then all he wanted to do was talk to me about Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul and El Camino. And he's like, I think they're gonna set it up for a sequel, make another El Camino. What do you think? And I was like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not David Costabile. and so a lot of times, I feel like I get recognized and it's not me at all.
I will say I actually have more often had the opposite thing happen, where people have said to me, sorry to bother you, but have you seen the newest version of The Tick? And I will go, yeah. And they'll go, so you must get it a lot, right? That you look like the guy. I've had that happen several times where people just go like, but if you start on a TV show, you would not look as tired and discombobulated as you do right now. You do not look like someone who had the wherewithal to be given dialogue in front of a camera. I will also say, though, Peter, I mean, your bridge to this was saying, like, oh, because we're on camera more, we might have more experience with this. I'll say, like, without fail, the overwhelming majority of times I've gotten recognized by people on the street are from podcast things. Both my own podcast and appearing on other people's podcasts, and they are the harder ones to figure out how to negotiate, to Connor's point, because people do, like, they've spent so much time feeling like they're having a conversation with you in their head. And I've had the same thing. I listen to podcasts obsessively, and it's always, whenever I meet someone whose podcast I've listened to for a while, it feels like going on a date where you've Googled everything about the person and they know nothing about you. You know, and it's very hard not to overstep.
All your stories are already spent.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll also say this. We don't know how it's going to be post-quarantine because, there's not a lot, but there's a chunk of people who are watching George Lucas Talk Show every week where we are doing at least 4 hours a week, which sounds insane. Watch the show. I think you'll like it, people listening. But, there's a lot of people that we don't know who are watching the show now. So I think this is going to start happening more where it's like, oh, you're Watto. I know you as Watto.
I'm unrecognizable. No one will be able to
Patrick,
tell.
you're the only one who's going to get this because I'm completely sprayed up with white hair and a George Lucas beard. Griffin is even more unrecognizable. He'll only get recognized if he puts an elephant trunk on his face and walks around.
I have a quick fix for this. Don't put the elephant trunk on outside my front door.
But Patrick, the one thing is, Patrick, you're sporting this huge beard that you've grown during the pandemic. If you just go clean shaven, that's your de-wattoing.
That's true. That's true.
Or you wear the Watto nose, and then people are like, well, it looks kind of, it's not the guy. He's just somebody else wearing the Watto nose.
Anyone who wants to be recognized as Watto, all you got to do is dress up like Watto, and you'll walk around, and everyone will be like, that's Watto.
I mean,
Can I
I've
say-
offered up to Griffin to switch roles multiple times, and he never takes it. So we'll see.
Well, when you shave, maybe can you try to keep as much as of your shavings intact as possible, so I can have them? Because maybe
yeah, sure.
you'll take a run with the nose, and I'll try the beard on for a little bit.
Done deal.
Cool.
Well, I think that's pretty much all we had for this week's stuff. Did you guys have any more last cracks at the anything from The Last Jedi that you wanted to mention before we jump off?
I feel.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. No, I was just gonna say, I think everyone's just got to calm down and relax and have fun. And it's Star Wars, and it's a movie, and we're all just here
He's right.
because we like it. And I think everyone should just smile more and be nice to each other, and stop hiring Russian troll farms to go after people.
Yeah, I'll just say to this point, I mean, what Connor was saying about, like, you don't, I mean, the whole joke tangent we went on of, like, what your Star Wars is and where it ends and how you don't really have to think about the things that you don't like, especially as Star Wars just expands more and more, faster and faster with each year these days. Like, RoboCop is, like, I love as much as anything in the world. The first movie is perfect for me. And I, for so long, avoided watching RoboCop 2 or 3 because I was just like, they're going to make me angry, and I want to pretend that they don't exist because the story ends perfectly. And I would start watching 2, and then the fact that the helmet's back on and he's lost his humanity and everything feels reset, I get so bummed out and I turn it off. And then I had a back injury, and I was, home in bed for a while needing more and more things to watch. And I just went like, screw it, I'm going to watch RoboCop 2 and 3. And I watched them, and I don't like them. But I finally realized, like, it doesn't matter. Like, knowing what happens in RoboCop 2 and 3 doesn't mean that I can't watch RoboCop 1 and just ignore those movies. Like, I felt for so long like having that knowledge in my head would somehow tarnish the first film. And it fundamentally didn't. And in fact, there are now things I've come to appreciate about RoboCop 2 and 3, even though I don't really like either of them. There's one perfect movie for me, and there's a lot of other RoboCop stuff. There's a remake and a TV show and 2 sequels and all this stuff, comic books, and I, like, engage with all of it a little bit. But in my mind, I'm like, there's one perfect thing and then a bunch of other stuff. And, I just think for me, like, part of being a Star Wars fan is also is less about, I feel like, over time, learning to find the things you love and drill down into why you love them. Not to paraphrase Rose Tico here, instead of trying to spend all of your energy trying to break down the things you hate and fight against them.
Yeah,
Especially because we're going to get 10 Star Wars TV shows every year for the rest of time.
Yeah. I think in the end, the real Star Wars was the people you didn't yell at about Star Wars along the way.
It's deep. It's true. There's going to be more Star Wars forever, it seems. Yeah. At least for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. That's the hope. Give us more,
Yeah.
Give us more.
Well, if you, listeners, viewers, etc., you can't get enough, you want there to be more Star Wars Minute forever, guess what? If you go support us on Patreon, you will have not 1, but 2 weekend shows this weekend. 1 on Saturday, 1 on Sunday. That's 7 days a week. And if you, you sign up now, you can even get access to a bunch of old episodes. We've done more than 300 weekend shows at this point, and we've shown no signs of stopping. So go do that. Even at higher levels, you can even get original prints by our own Alex Robinson, or other fun things. So go to StarWarsMinute.com/Patreon and support us there. Thanks again, George Lucas Talk Show crew, for joining us this week. And we'll see everybody on the next Star Wars Minute.
Star Wars Minute!